Hi everybody, and welcome to DnD Horror Stories with DnD Doge. In today's video, we have a story about a dungeon master that goes to great lengths to have a DMPC sleep with a player character in a game of Dungeons & Dragons. A story about a player with main character syndrome that always disrupts the campaign, and much more. But first, in order to get our spirits up, Nipsey found some catnip.
Catnip, 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 catnip.
I hope you enjoyed the video as much as Nipsey enjoyed that catnip, and if you do, I hope you roll a crit on that like button, and consider subscribing if you aren't already. But with that said, let's get into some DnD horror stories. Creepy Dungeon Master tries to claim Prima Noctis by Reddit user That Bastard Over Dare. This happened a few years ago in a Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition game, and the audacity of this dungeon master still bewilders me. We were playing at a game store, and this was technically a paid DM. The relevant players were acquainted to me, as was most of the party, but they were kind of flirty with each other in real life, and were playing as a boyfriend, a kobold rogue, and girlfriend, an Eladrin sorcerer. I played as a drow cleric. Dungeon Master was into sorcerer's player from the get-go, and made up a whole litany of DMPCs to flirt with her, to no avail. Most ended up dying to his own monsters after trying to simp for her. At one point, he even told her point blank, "I'm going to roll up a high-value male who will sweep you off your feet." She then tried to tell him not to, and reminded him that she told him that she was dating the kobold rogue. So then, Dungeon Master went into overdrive, trying to kill him. Every monster we encountered would target him. Luckily, the party caught on to this, and defended him with our lives. In my case, literally. I even min-maxed my next character to deny DM the kill he wanted so badly. Eventually, the Dungeon Master sort of seemed to give up. Maybe he noticed just how obvious it was that he was targeting him, and how pathetic it was, and that killing him would just look desperate at this point. Dungeon Master then decided that since Sorcerer and Rogue were so happy together, his priest DMPC would marry them in the jungle town of Rothmar. We were supposed to go there, and meet the lord of the town for a mission anyway. We kind of thought this was his way of making up for his creepy behavior. During the event, we were vigilant on the off chance that the Dungeon Master was pulling a spiteful red wedding type thing. We rolled our perceptions and found nothing. Once the bride and groom said their vows and kissed each other, the Dungeon Master then gets a huge grin on his face and says, "As you kiss each other, the Lord of Rothmar, Rowan of House Garland, rides up and greets the bride and compliments her on her sexy and ravishing dress. He says that he will enjoy bedding her." Wait, what? She then said, "What? I'm not sleeping with him. I literally just got married. Look, why don't we buy you a hooker as a gift and talk about our next mission tomorrow? Just leave us alone for the time being." He then says, "Oh, no, little lady. It is my right as the lord of these lands to claim you on your wedding night. It's called Prima Noctis, the first night." Prima what now? Then, Kobold's player's face was very visibly enraged, and was staring daggers at the Dungeon Master. Dungeon Master then looked at him and said, "You can have her once I've used her. Wait your turn, dragon cuck," referring to the kobold. Kobold's player then said, "I use sneak attack to effing kill Lord Rowan." The rest of the party joined in, as the Dungeon Master swarmed us with guardsmen, assassins, and court wizards that we had absolutely no ability to defeat. He also decided on the fly that Lord Rowan was a lich. Basically, he was telling us, "Let my DMPC sleep with the bride, or you all die right now. Kobold's player confronted the Dungeon Master when this became apparent. He said, "What the F is this?" And Dungeon Master then said, "What? Not all encounters are balanced," as he chuckled. Kobold's player then said, "You know damn well what I mean." Dungeon Master then just said, "It's history. Lords were at the top of the hierarchy and had a right to F any woman they wanted on their wedding night to bless the marriage. It was seen as an honor back then." Eldrin said, "I doubt it was seen that way by the couples involved, especially the woman." And then the Dungeon Master said, "Oh, here we go with that lecture. Ma woman's oppression. Look, this campaign is dark, gritty, and realistic. If you can't handle a mature game of D&D without being preachy and acting like a pussy about it, then why don't you just leave and play in Matt Mercer's campaign or something?" So she did, as did her boyfriend, and the rest of the party. And that's how that campaign ended. We did get our money back for the whole campaign after complaining to the game store. He is still running paid games there though, but we did give him crap reviews, so hopefully that warns new players about him. TLDR: Creepy DM tries to make a woman he was interested in sleep with his DMPC in-game. Wow, what a creep. Imagine sipping that much for a player that you make multiple DMPCs to try to get with her character, and when that doesn't work, blatantly trying to off the character her character was dating. Then, just as things are looking to turn around, pulling that wedding and Prima Noctis crap, which I looked up, and apparently some people think that it was a thing back in medieval times, but apparently it's just a myth. Honestly, someone should have said something much sooner, but at least the group did eventually say something when the Dungeon Master crossed one line too many, and ultimately decided to leave. Hopefully, OP and the other players were able to find another game to play in, this time without a creeper of a Dungeon Master. Let's move on. I don't know how to deal with a quote, evil-aligned player character. By Reddit user SpookyBoyle986. Hi everyone. I'm having some trouble dealing with a fellow player character at a table I'm playing at. The issue I'm having is there is one particular player who is insisting on playing a quote, secret character who is some sort of evil aligned. The character is a rogue, but he doesn't even want the other player characters to know that much about him. Therefore, the character refuses to do rogue things, like sneak attack, unlock things, etc., when the other player characters can see them. As you can assume, this makes them very frustrating whenever the party encounters anything. He just kind of runs away and hides, while the rest of us have to deal with whatever the encounter is. Also, while the rest of the player character's party are dealing with monsters, investigations, etc., he will go through the dungeon on his own and loot everything before we get there. His defense is the classic, "That's what my character would do." In the last session, I sort of let my frustration boil over. We were entering an encounter, and I said something along the lines of, "Hey rogue, this looks dangerous. You'd better run away and then come back when it's time to divide the loot." This player got quite upset and replied with, "I'm just role-playing, and this is what my character would do." To which I responded, "Well, my character would throw your character out of the party, since all you've done is hinder us the entire time we've been adventuring." The rest of the table, the Dungeon Master, and 2 additional players, just kind of went silent. This was all a few days ago, and I am feeling that there may have been another way to resolve this. I'm open to any suggestions. Well, in this situation, it may have not been the best thing for OP to boil over like that, but I can see why they would. My suggestion here would be to talk to the Dungeon Master about possibly having a player meeting to discuss why the way this player is playing their character is hindering the enjoyment of the other players, and that it wouldn't make any sense in character for the other party members to keep this character around if all they do is run away from encounters and take all the loot for themselves. I would also say that the DM is partially to blame here for letting this player do these things without any type of repercussions in game. Like him going off without the rest of the party in order to go loot everything while the party is busy with other things. He should have occasionally run into a monster or a trap or something like that. But yeah, I think just having an adult discussion with everyone is the way to go here. Though, what would you all suggest? Let's move on. How to deal with a particular player. He makes D&D difficult to play with. By Reddit user Taro Swallows. In summary, there is a recurrent player in our local game store, Dungeons & Dragons Gatherings, who can be likened to a literal anchor. While I respect players' autonomy in shaping their gameplay experiences, the persistent presence of this individual often results in disrupted sessions. The primary challenge we face is that our local game store enforces a policy where paying customers are allowed to participate regardless of disruptive behavior, leaving the Dungeon Master to manage the situation. Suggestions have been made, including eliminating the problematic player's character, requesting their departure, or discussing the issue with the local game store management. However, it appears that the local game store prioritizes revenue from entry fees over maintaining a conductive gaming environment. Presently, all participants in our campaign are at level 6, and this player has opted for a multi-class approach, compromising levels in Warlock 2, Bard 1, Paladin 1, and Sorcerer 2. Challenges arise from the player's selective engagement with the game mechanics. They are extremely stubborn and consistently decline to utilize Bardic Inspiration or provide healing support to incapacitated party members, relying instead on magic missiles until their spell slots are depleted. Additionally, they adopt a passive approach to combat, rationalizing their character's behavior as cowardice, and resorting to disruptive actions, such as attacking NPCs and insulting fellow players with vicious mockery whenever they get called out. Furthermore, they exhibit possessive behavior towards items, disrupt the DM's narration by interjecting with unrelated actions, an example being casting Firebolt during pivotal dialogue moments or at significant environmental elements, and have, on occasion, instigated player versus player conflict through reckless use of area of effect spells, or by neglecting pleas for assistance in favor of aggressive spells, as they want the kill. During a recent quest, our party successfully thwarted a bandit raid on a farming community. However, during the aftermath, he noticed nobody was paying him any attention, and thus he grew restless and, in an act of boredom or disregard, cast Firebolt at the village's crops. This impulsive action resulted in the destruction of the crops, exacerbating the villagers' plight and inciting a small riot. Consequently, the affected NPCs turned hostile towards both the offending player and the rest of our party. In an attempt to deflect blame, the player in question accused us of prolonging dialogue unnecessarily, further complicating the situation. The situation has deteriorated to the extent that the players are resorting to either switching tables or, quote, tagging a different dungeon master in order to avoid dealing with this player. Instances of player versus player conflict have arisen due to the player's indiscriminate use of area of effect spells, or deliberate disregard for allies in distress, opting instead to prioritize a kill over aiding comrades in precarious situations. For instance, when a fellow player failed a crucial check twice and requested a bardic inspiration, the group collectively suggested that providing support to the struggling ally would be more advantageous than inflicting minimal damage with offensive spells. Despite acknowledging this advice, The player proceeded to cast magic missiles and pass their turn, demonstrating a consistent pattern of self-serving behavior at the expense of cooperative gameplay. Yeah, it does kinda sound like the Dungeon Master is in a bit of a bind here. Perhaps pull the player aside and explain how his actions are ruining the game for the other players, and maybe he would take that advice in stride and start being more considerate. Though something tells me that that wouldn't be the case. In which case, I would normally suggest kicking this player, but as OP said, due to the local game store policy, that is not an option. I would say that this is one of the few times that I would suggest dealing with the issue in-game. The next time this player does something reckless in a way that endangers the party, let the party deal with him in PvP. Or, like in the case of him burning down the village's crops, have the NPCs of the town aim their ire towards that particular player, instead of the party as a whole. Have his in-game actions have in-game consequences, and then, perhaps after having a character die, he might start to rethink his playing style. Or you could just talk to the other players, see if any of them have hosting space that would be adequate for hosting games, and just take the game out of the store, then uninvite that player. Though, what would you all suggest here? Let's move on to the next post. Should I leave this campaign? By Reddit user, TheRealJacketHM. First off, I'm 15 years old. I love D&D, and usually I am the Dungeon Master because I love writing. However, at my local game store, a D&D campaign is being hosted, so for the first time, I decided to be a player. The campaign was basically okay up until this point, just lighthearted fun. The Dungeon Master is a strong dude who used to be in the military and is pretty scary at times, but it was all fun and games until the labyrinth began 2 sessions ago. We entered this labyrinth, and me and the only female player got stuck in a room together. I play a half-elf, and this magic door begins to emit a spell that puts her, a dragonborn, to sleep. It is then up to me to wake her up. The whole time, the rest of the table begin to make jokes that I'm essaying her in this room, as they can't get to us. I am a survivor myself, and began to feel really uncomfortable when they started doing this. Eventually, I woke her up by dousing her in water, but not after poking her with my sword, putting her near a fire, slapping her, and generally trying anything I can to wake her up. One party member decides to tell her that I essayed her in her sleep, and she then almost kills me. I ended up screaming at the table to stop it with this joke. I hadn't told them why, but I told them that it was hurting me and made me very uncomfortable. The Dungeon Master asks me to leave. However, he decided he was gonna, quote, give me one more chance. So he did. He says if I have an outburst over, quote, not being able to take a joke again, I'll be removed completely. He said that other campaigns make worse jokes, and I have no clue if that's true, but if it is, I might just stick to being a Dungeon Master for my friends. Please help me. I have no idea what to do. All I know is that I'm hurt. Very, very hurt. Wow, what a dickhead of a Dungeon Master. Not only did he allow essay themes and jokes at a D&D table that is in a public game store, but allowed them to be aimed at a 15-year-old. Then, when OP expressed that it was making them uncomfortable, this dude, who sounds like a grown man, tells OP to learn how to take a joke? Sure, OP didn't tell him that they were a survivor, but that shouldn't be an issue. And OP telling him that they were making them uncomfortable should have been enough for that Dungeon Master to put a stop to it. My advice to OP would be to just leave that table, and just go back to playing with your friends. I would also inform the staff of the game store about the incident, That way, they can put a stop to it, so no one else gets blindsided by that crap. Then, maybe after a bit of time has passed, see if there are new people running games at that store, and try them out. But I would definitely not go back to that game. Let's move on. How do I tell my DM not to roleplay absent characters? By Reddit user Cavill561. So, my dungeon master is new at this, but doing alright so far. He rolls a d20 to decide every skill check DC for some reason, but he's good at enabling player creativity. So, my character is a centaur samurai who was incredibly war-hardened, but through joining the party, he's been learning to appreciate others. One way this manifested was finding an egg after killing a dragon. The party was hoping for it to hatch into a mighty wormling, and my centaur wanted to be its father, so he became very protective over it. We turned a forest pit into our treasure hoard, and my centaur decided to stay there, instead of meeting our contractor to collect a reward. He wanted to remain with the egg, in case it hatched and needed nurturing, and he knew the party would return to the treasure hoard sooner or later. Out of game, we only had about 90 minutes left to play, and I can have tons of fun just watching my friends play D&D, so I was expecting the story to continue without me temporarily. I was wrong though, as my party continued the adventure and met with our contractor, only to be betrayed dramatically. This was great, but the problem was, the dungeon master kept interrupting the scene to ask what my centaur was doing at the treasure hoard. Since my centaur is a painter, I just said that he's painting the egg, and not much else. He was just waiting at the hoard, not really participating in the storyline for the moment. This didn't stop the dungeon master from constantly interrupting the main storyline to ask what my centaur was doing, and it absolutely killed the pacing, especially because I never had an interesting answer. I think the other players began to get frustrated that my character was wasting their time, and I can't blame them. I felt bad that I kept killing their momentum. This became much worse when the egg began to hatch, and only my centaur was present. I roleplayed my centaur jumping with joy and caring for the baby, but I knew the other players wanted to be present when the egg hatched, and I felt so bad. I was hoping to be ignored until the party returned to our treasure hoard, and offhandedly told the dungeon master as much. How do I tell my dungeon master more firmly that role-playing an absent character is a bad idea? He is a bit sensitive to criticism, and I want to avoid crushing his DM spirit, so I don't know how to bring it up. Well, honestly, it just sounds like the dungeon master just didn't want OP to feel left out while playing the game, so would occasionally cut to OP's character. If it was making OP uncomfortable, and OP just wanted to watch the others roleplay their stuff, OP should have just told the dungeon master that as plainly as possible, saying something like, "Hey, I would be alright with just watching the others do their thing, so you don't have to keep cutting to my character. And if there is something that you want to have happen with my character, we can just quickly roleplay those scenes after the other characters do their thing." So yeah, just straight up communication is the answer here. Let's move on to today's final story. Never Let Them Name the NPCs by Reddit user Seattle Leftist. I let my players name a throwaway NPC. The NPC was the third crossbowman in a group associated with the BBEGs, second in command. They ended up talking with this group more in depth than I planned for, so asked for help in naming the soldiers. One soldier in particular, they named Ross Bowman, the crossbowman. They begged and begged for this NPC to come along with the party, and I allowed it. I played him as the most generic, boring soldier you can imagine. When they asked his advice, which was often, Ross Bowman, the crossbowman, always sided with the interest of the army. We play online and use a dice program, so there is no roll fudging. For sessions and sessions, Ross Bowman, the crossbowman, stayed with the party and never made a hit during a fight. I suggested someone in the party give him a weapon besides his crossbow, but the party unanimously agreed that Ross Bowman, the crossbowman, would be better off with just his crossbow. It is perhaps the only time the party has unanimously agreed on anything. We continue to play, and despite the odds, Ross Bowman, the crossbowman, never hit an enemy. Months of playing go by, and the players are finally ready to fight the BBEG. Initiative is rolled, and Ross Bowman, the crossbowman, is not first, but rolls high. On his turn, Ross Bowman, the crossbowman, lets loose a bolt from his crossbow and hits the BBEG. Ross Bowman, the crossbowman, finally had his moment to shine and yells out, "I did it!" The party is ecstatic for Ross Bowman, the crossbowman, who has just made his first hit since traveling with the party. The next turn is the BBEG, who, of course, turns his attention to Ross Bowman, the crossbowman. The BBEG rolls a nat 20, and Ross Bowman, the crossbowman, is taken out in one shot. The party is now red with rage, and takes out the BBEG. And so ends the tale of Ross Bowman, the crossbowman. May he rest in peace. While not a horror story in the traditional sense, I figured we could all use a bit of levity from the normal that guys and murder hobos. Honestly, naming a soldier with a crossbow Ross Bowman sounds like something my D&D party would do. Well, at least my rogue and our bard. And it is quite comical that he basically shot his crossbow as accurately as a stormtrooper would shoot their blaster. And the cherry on top is that when he finally gets a hit and celebrates the occasion by cheering, he gets one-shot by the BBEG. At least this gave the party the extra push to defeat the evil in order to avenge their crossbow-wielding friend. So again, rest in peace, Ross Bowman, the crossbowman. But that is all I have for you today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and may your games remain horror story free. Until next time.